Please let me know if you can hear me okay, if the audio and video is working okay. It's showing up funny on my computer. Ooh, okay, there it goes. I think, yeah. Brahmanandam Paramasukadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dvandvatitam Gagana Sadrisham Tattvamasya Dilaksham Ekam Nityam Vimalamachalam Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam Bhavatitam Chagunarahitam Sadgurum Tam Namami. Adorations to the Divine Preceptor, who is the bliss of Brahman, the giver of supreme joy, the embodiment of pure consciousness, beyond the pairs of opposites, vast like the ether, infinite, eternal, beyond all modifications. To that divine Guru I offer my adorations. Om Shri Gurave Namaha. We will also be doing the prayer for universal welfare. And most of y'all should be familiar with this. Sarvesham swastir bhavatu, sarvesham shantir bhavatu, sarvesham purnam bhavatu, sarvesham mangalam bhavatu, sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kashchit dukh bhavet. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityur ma amritam gamaya. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamaveva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. And the peace chant from the Upanishads. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvin Avaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Jai Ganesha Jai Ganesha Jai Ganesha Pahimam Shri Ganesha Shri Ganesha Shri Ganesha Rakshamam Jai Saraswati Jai Saraswati Jai Saraswati Pahimam Shri Saraswati Shri Saraswati Shri Saraswati Rakshamam Jai Shri Lakshmi Jai Shri Lakshmi Jai Shri Lakshmi Pahimam Jaya Shri Lakshmi, Jaya Shri Lakshmi, Jaya Shri Lakshmi Rakshamam, Jaya Guru Shiva Guru Hari Guru Ram, Jagat Guru Parama Guru Sadguru Shyam, Adi Guru Advait Guru Ananda Guru Om, Chira Guru Chidgana Guru Chinmaya Guru Om. Om Tat Sat, Om Tat Sat, Om Tat Sat, Om. Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Om Shanti, Om. Om Tat Sat, divine blessings to each one of you who are able to attend this evening's Yoga Vasistha Satsanga. I know it's been a couple of weeks. I was down with some congestion and a lot of coughing, so it would have been a bit difficult to record videos while not being able to talk without coughing. But everything's fine now. And let's see, Sadashivaji, Om Tat Sat, divine blessings. We'll be picking back up in Yoga Vasistha, Book 1. And we're currently in Volume 1, the section Mumukshu Vyavahara Prakarana. And so this is the section that covers the, like the personality traits of aspirants and spiritual seekers. And we left off at section 17, and this evening we're going to read section 17 and 18 because they kind of go together. There's not a lot of commentary to add to it because it's going to give a little bit of detail into the scripture and how the scriptures is laid out when studying it and reading it. So it's pretty straightforward. So we will start with section 17, the general plan of Yoga Vasistha. Sage Vasistha continued, O Rama, just as the sky, bereft of clouds, is clear enough to reveal the lustrous beauty of the moon, so the mind of an aspirant that is free from the impressions of evil association is clear enough to reveal the grandeur of the self. If the tree of action in one's personality is laden with the fruits of virtue, then one is inclined to hear this divine scripture. Yoga Vasistha, having a total of 32,000 verses, deals with liberation and the manner of attaining it. A person slumbering in the night is awakened by the presence of a dazzling light, even against his will. In the same way, one who is slumbering in the darkness of ignorance is awakened by the light of Yoga Vasistha, even against his will. The first chapter of Yoga Vasistha consists of 1,500 verses. It is called Vairagya Prakarana because it deals with the topic of dispassion. So Vairagya is dispassion, and Prakarana, it pretty much translates to section. It also negates one's reliance on destiny and shows how self-effort is all-powerful. One must develop Vairagya and attain self-realization. This is the goal of self-effort. The second chapter is known as Mumukshu Prakarana, since it deals with the topic of aspiration. It contains 1,000 verses and describes the qualities of those who aspire to attain liberation. So that is the area of the scripture that we're currently on. The third chapter is called Utpatti Prakarana and deals with the origination of the world process. In 7,000 verses, it shows that the world arises on the basis of illusion. When the illusion is removed by wisdom, the world vanishes from one's consciousness. It abounds with stories, illustrations, poetic similes, and profound instructions. The fourth chapter, having 3,000 verses, is called Sthiti Prakarana, the chapter on establishment. When the world is negated by one's intuitional vision, the soul in man becomes established in its essential nature, Brahman, the Absolute. It shows how Brahman assumes the role of seer and sight and manifests as this world process. The fifth chapter is called Upashanti Prakarana. Containing 5,000 verses, it shows the method of dissolving the multiplicity of the world process. Therefore, it is called the chapter on quiescence. The clamor of the world is drowned in the silence of the self. By gaining the insight that is presented in this chapter, a yogi ascends the ladder of wisdom. The world becomes like a painted picture as he annihilates the impressions of worldliness from his unconscious mind. The sixth chapter is called Nirvana Prakarana because it deals with the topic of liberation. It contains 14,500 verses and describes the method of destroying ignorance in order to realize the divine self. With the destruction of ignorance, all the ills of the body and mind are destroyed, the cause of pain is removed, and infinite bliss is realized. Just as a black bee abides somewhere in a small corner of the vast Meru Mountains, so this world process abides in a small portion of the mighty mountain of ignorance. This self sustains numerous worlds like dust particles scintillating in the rays of the sun. The heart of a sage becomes so vast that even the mighty gods of heaven cannot measure its expansion. There is nothing greater, more glorious, or blissful than the realization of the self. And that description that I just read, this self sustains numerous worlds like dust particles scintillating in the rays of the sun. One of the previous Yoga Vasistha Satsangas I had recorded, some of y'all might remember, I used a light with glitter and I was dropping the glitter in front of the light and you could see it all shimmering. So that's a good video to go back to. And there's more explanation on that topic. So moving on to section 18, the special qualities of Yoga Vasistha. Sri Vasistha continued, O Rama, seeds sown in the best soil give rise to a golden harvest. In the same way, the teachings contained in the 6 volumes of Yoga Vasistha, when sown in the fertile soil of the heart, give rise to the eternal harvest of self-realization. Excuse me. But even the most authentic teachings of the sacred scriptures cannot effect transformation in a human being unless they are understood at the level of his reason. The words of children, if they are intelligible to one's reason, should be accepted and honored, while the words of Brahma, the Creator himself, if they are disagreeable to reason, should be ignored like a straw. No teaching that is not accepted by one's reason will be able to unlift one's consciousness. Those who ignore the study of Yoga Vasistha by asserting that they must receive spiritual instructions only from the most ancient scriptures, such as the Vedas, are like those dull-witted men who would not drink water from a well that had been recently dug in front of their house, because they prefer to draw water only from the ancient wells dug by their forefathers. When the vision of this scripture settles in the mind of an aspirant, his dark ignorance is dispelled as spontaneously as the night is dispelled with the rising of the sun. By listening to Yoga Vasistha, a yogi develops the art of directing his mind to his innermost self. He is able to gather divine impressions in his chitta, the mind stuff. His intellect begins to shine brighter and brighter as it is gradually freed from the clouds of greed, infatuation, and other impurities. O Rama, your intellect is pure. All that you need is to hear the wisdom which is going to be provided through the teachings of Yoga Vasistha. By utilizing this wisdom that separates the self from the not-self, you will render your mind as profound as the unruffled ocean and as vast as the cloudless sky. Protected by the armor of the wisdom of Yoga Vasistha, a spiritual hero will not be injured by degrading thoughts, which are the arrows of the world process. Though confronted with terrifying conditions in life, he will not falter from his spiritual movement. The arrows of fear will fail to pierce his indomitable spiritual consciousness. By reflecting upon the teachings of this scripture, one acquires the profundity of an ocean, the invincibility of a mountain, and the coolness of the radiant moon. With his veil of ignorance torn by the sword of wisdom, he becomes free from the influences of attachment and hatred. Just as the Pishachas, the spirits of darkness, did not sport in the daytime, so the petty thoughts of the mind, the humiliating sentiments of the heart, and the perverted impressions of the unconscious do not persist when wisdom rises in the heart of an aspirant. The intellect that has acquired steadiness by communing with the spiritual vision revealed in this scripture remains unshaken in the midst of the stormy world process. Just as a creeper within a painting cannot be shaken by the external winds, and creeper, it means like a vine. So the intellect that is established in the self cannot be shaken by the winds of external conditions. A knower of truth does not fall into the pits of attachment and delusion. How can a person well acquainted with the path that he treads rush to fall into pits? When the intellect of a yogi is freed from all forms of attachment, he is able to comprehend the entire universe, nay, even the endless worlds that exist in every particle of this universe, within his own consciousness. He becomes the knower of Maya, cosmic illusion. When the intellect is purified, the experiences of pleasure and pain do not cause either elation or depression in the mind of a yogi. he becomes fully contented with whatever he acquires in his daily life. O Rama, whoever studies this scripture and reflects upon the meaning that is presented in it will effect a spiritual change in his personality. This is as true as curses or boons uttered by gods. By reflecting upon the teachings of this scripture, one becomes fit to attain self-realization. He does not need to undergo various disciplines of austerity, repetition of mantra, or meditation in order to attain this goal. Mere understanding of the wisdom contained in Yoga Vasistha gives rise to self-realization and is the goal of all austerities and spiritual disciplines. There may be effort involved in crushing the tender petals of flowers, but there is no effort involved in attaining self-realization. All one's effort is directed towards the removal of obstacles in the form of attachments, doubts, and negative impressions. When the cloud is dispersed, the moon reveals itself without any effort. In crushing a flower, one needs to exercise one's fingertips, but in attaining realization, one needs to transcend even the subtle functions of intellect, not to mention the functions of the body. In fact, there is no physical or mental tension needed in order to sustain the wisdom of the self. After listening to these teachings, one begins to understand that this world is like a dream, but one who is lazy or procrastinating in listening to the teachings of Yoga Vasistha will be unable to perceive the world as a dream, in spite of his intellectual conviction to that effect. O Rama, the intellect that arises after listening to the scripture is that blessed intuition which bestows self-realization upon a person, the supreme destiny of every soul. While the intellect led by the little lights of limited philosophical systems leads one to the forest of doubts and confusion, the intellect, led by the wisdom of Yoga Vasistha, leads one to the realization of the essential wisdom of all the Vedas declared in the great utterance, I am Brahman. I am the absolute self. The self is the non-dual reality. I am that eternal self. And we finished that very quickly. Anyone, please let me know if y'all want me to keep reading. I'm absolutely fine to keep reading. I just don't want to overwhelm anybody. The next section would be Section 19, Brahman is revealed by right knowledge, Pramana. So I think, yeah, yes, Sadhusthi says yes. Yes. Okay, we'll keep going. We will fill this time because I've missed it, so. Okay, moving on. So I'll have to edit the title of the video so it's updated. Section 19. Brahman is revealed by right knowledge, Pramana. Sage Vasistha continued, O Rama, this scripture which I am going to expound for you adopts various methods of right knowledge to reveal the nature of the Absolute. The purpose of the scripture is to show the identity of the individual soul with the divine self by eliminating the illusory attributes which cause an erroneous separation between them. And so, because of our ignorance, and we naturally, being human, we define our true self as the physical body, or our titles, our names, our jobs, our careers, and things like that. But that is very limited thinking, and that is ignorance. And so the scripture and also the other scriptures, they help us to distinguish between self and non-self. And so that goes into the topics of non-duality. The individual soul devoid of ignorance is the absolute self. And that's where our ignorance, the veil of ignorance, is hiding, it's covering up. It is not allowing us to see and to experience and to understand our true self and the true nature of the self. And so through various practices or listening to the scriptures such as Yoga Vasistha or other satsangas, our veil of ignorance, it thins out and thins out and thins out. And so more wisdom is gained and the intellect becomes more clear. And so we have more understanding of our true self. In the same way, the divine self, devoid of the illusory force of Maya, is Brahman. And so when that veil of cosmic illusion, Maya, and our ignorance is thinned out and thinned out and thinned out, and you go beyond that, there's that realization, that recognition of I am that. I am Brahman. Brahman is all-encompassing, everything, and I am that. The great utterance of the Upanishads, "Thou art that," refers to the identity of the soul with the absolute self. And so, thou art that. So that is capitalized. And so it's thou art that. So you can think of it being said that way. Various illustrations are adopted to enlighten the mind regarding the illusoriness of the world and the non-duality of the self. So throughout these scriptures, there are various illustrations, there's various examples and similes and stories and all different ways of explaining to help us understand better. These illustrations cannot be absolutely perfect. Their purpose is to illumine the inner truth. So it's shining a light on the inner truth. It's not just basically giving us answers on a golden platter. We still have to put in that self-effort and our own self-work. Just as it is the purpose of a lamp to illumine the objects in a room. Sorry, I didn't read ahead on this, and so I'm underlining. The world is described as a dream in order to reveal its illusory nature. So if we think of this world in terms of a dream, and you think of when you go to bed at night and you fall asleep and you enter into the dream state and you have dreams, but then eventually you wake up and that dream is over. It wasn't real. It might have felt very real during the dream, in that dream state. But then you wake up and you're in your room, you're in your bed, whatever. And so the dream is temporary. The dream is illusory. And so is this world and this world process. is it tangible, real? Yes, like my sweater is tangible, I can touch it, so it is real, but it is illusory. And so the world process exists, but it is temporary. It is not truth, because truth is eternal. Truth doesn't end. It is described as a snake in a rope in order to show that it is a phenomenon of superimposition. And so Guruji would explain the snake in a rope sometimes. And if you imagine you're like walking down a path, like a road, and you see what would look like a coiled up snake in the road on the ground, and it scares you, and the closer you get to it, or if you have a light and you shine a flashlight on it, you see that it's not a snake, it's a rope. But the mind, because of the shape, and then just jumping to that conclusion of, oh, it's a snake. And so that's how the world process is. We superimpose what we think is real onto the world process, and we think that that is truth, but the world process is illusory, and behind this world process is Brahman. Behind this world process is the all-encompassing. The self is described as vast as the sky in order to show that it is untouched by the clouds of mental desires and thought processes. So think of a pretty spring summer sky, and the sky is blue, and there's big puffy white clouds going by. The clouds, we would say, are in the sky, like, oh look, there's a whole bunch of clouds in the sky. But the sky is not impacted, it is not affected or touched per se by these clouds. And so we can think of the clouds and the sky. So the sky is like our mind, and then the clouds are the thoughts, desires, emotions, attachments, things like that. And you just think of them blowing by, but they don't affect the sky. And so we aren't attached to what's going by, all these emotions and thoughts and everything, and we just kind of let them float on by. The self is described as the ocean in order to illustrate its fullness. Just as gold appears in different ornaments, so Brahman appears in the form of numerous objects of the world. So when we think of gold jewelry, you can have gold rings, gold bracelets, gold necklaces, gold watches, and to the visual, what we see are multiplicity. We see different objects, but then take them to a goldsmith and it can all be melted down to gold. It is gold at its source, at its core, it is gold. And so in the same way that gold has taken on different forms, Brahman also takes on many different forms. And so that includes me, that includes you, that includes your neighbor, that includes your family members, your boss, your co-workers, the people down the street, anyone and everyone, the animals outside. It is an all-encompassing thing. Thus, the illustration of gold is only to show the illusoriness of all names and forms. So Brahman is all. Brahman is that. It is everything. And there are just a variety of names and forms where, like, I'm a woman, that person's a man, I'm Caucasian, that person is from India or Russia or Alaska or Africa, wherever. This person's a CEO, this person's a janitor, this person's a teacher, this person's elderly, this person's young, this person's middle-aged. All of these are different forms, they're different names, they're different titles, and this is at the worldly level of limited understanding, the limited intellect. That's kind of like the peak of identification. And through Sanatana Dharma and studying the scriptures and the process of self-realization, you begin to uncover and you move beyond the names and forms, and you start to understand the all-encompassing Brahman and how we are all connected and how everything is connected. One who adopts illustrations and arguments only to refute the views of other schools of thought is called a Bodha Chanchu. I hope I said that right. Apologies if not. One whose wisdom is confined to the beak only. So basically one that talks but does not understand. So all talk, nothing coming out, nothing understand up there. And so there's people that will use illustrations and arguments, and their purpose behind doing so is to refute and to debate and argue other schools of thought or other religions or other spiritual practices. And when you really think of individuals who do this, and you think of the personality traits and the challenges of the human mind and what's going through it, there can be fear, there can be ego, there can be an unhealthy level of pride, because even within various paths and religions and spiritual practices and disciplines, these two are just different forms and different names. He is, as it were, a crow who is satisfied with pecking at wisdom without allowing it to descend into his heart. And so that's like people that use scriptures against others and they aren't following it themselves. So the goal is due to ego. The goal is from a negative state of mind, and it is impure. It does not come from a pure state of mind. One who negates the need for spiritual knowledge with his intellectual arguments, and thus promotes confusion in his own mind as well as in the minds of others, is indeed a Bodha Chanchu. And so these are like ones that they start debates. We can see this happen a lot on social media, especially in a lot of the spirituality groups. And certain people will kind of just spew scripture from the mouth. Just lots of words without understanding. And then they're only using these words to sound smart or to impress other people. And so once again, it comes from impure state of mind. And so when we see people like this, it is good to show compassion, which can sometimes be tricky. It can sometimes be challenging. Take it as a challenge, take it as a test. My personal experience, I have gone through it directly with certain individuals, and it is like a test, and the more you learn about these things, we can understand that that person, there's a lot more going on. There is ego or need for recognition, or something's happened in another area of their life, and so they're trying to elevate this part of their life to feel better about themselves or to feel good about themselves. But in this process of doing these things and starting these arguments and these debates with other people, it ends up confusing other people. And that's where it becomes a situation of basically the blind leading the blind. And we see this with false swamis, false gurus, who they're not truly a swami or a guru at all. And there isn't the proper level of knowledge, wisdom, practice, understanding, commitment, intuitive knowledge, intuitive vision. And so it confuses other people, because a lot of the times the scriptures can be taken in a completely wrong direction, in a wrong way, which then turns into actually going against the scriptures. And so that can confuse other people. All means of right knowledge terminate in the revelation of the self. Any process of knowledge that does not reveal the self is illusory and erroneous. A true process of knowledge, having revealed Brahman, ceases. When a fire has consumed its fuel, it stops burning. So when a soul becomes self-realized or has attained liberation in this lifetime, the efforts that have been put in can still continue. And so we can think of our own Guruji, Swami Nikhilananda, or Guru Ma, or Swami Jyotirmayananda ji, and although self-realized and still in physical form, Guru Ma and Swami Jyotirmayananda, the practices didn't stop. They continued their practices. They continue to do their daily duties. That is their dharma. And so the process of true knowledge, which reveals Brahman to that soul, all that fuel is now burned up, and it has been used. And it's, in a way, hard to put into words. In a way, it's like reaching the peak height. There's nothing else beyond that. And so it's similarly like a fire, where all the fuel, so all of the wood scraps, or if there's like liquid fuel like gasoline or something's been poured on it, when all that is burned up, the fire is done, the fire is over with, it did its job, basically. The self alone manifests in all internal thought processes and in all the external objects of the world. So it is the self alone that is behind all the internal thought processes that are experienced while we are in human embodiment. It is the self that is the seer. It is the self that is the experiences. It is the self that is behind the worldly objects and behind the world process. It is the self that is beyond recognition and beyond more than what the human mind can comprehend until that soul is liberated, until that person becomes self-realized. I like to think of it more as like coming back to the self, because the self has always been there. The knowledge of the self is always there. It's just covered up and kind of like a disconnect. And so we're working towards like untangling everything and reconnecting to our true self. The mind and the objects are vibrations in consciousness. They are illusory. In the state of spiritual realization, both are transcended. So when we think of all the worldly objects and we think of the mind, and we have this mind while in human embodiment, and when our time comes and it is time for the soul to depart our boat, this human suit, the mind also ceases. Eventually the mind ceases. And so it is also transient, and these are just ripples, and you can think of them as like little vibrations, like little ripples. There's a lot of if you look into physics, there's little graphics that can actually explain this. So in the mind, in the state of a self-realized soul, a self-realized individual, the mind and the objects are transcended, and so it is beyond, it has gone beyond those limitations. This world of objectivity is sustained by the light of the supreme seer, Brahman. The self alone exists. Therefore, O Rama, do not entertain the thought that I am conditioned by the destiny generated by my past karmas. Rather, undertake right self-effort and drive destiny out of your mind. Thus acquire right knowledge in order to understand and realize the self. And so, like we've heard in the scriptures repeatedly, multiple times throughout multiple different scriptures, that self-effort is important. Putting in the self-effort in our practices and truly opening up our heart and opening up our mind and working on setting the ego aside, negating the ego, and then driving destiny out of the mind. And so in our earlier satsanga, we covered this topic of destiny and not relying on destiny, because when we rely on destiny and just blame destiny, that is basically sitting back and giving up. That is just pointing fingers without putting in self-effort to change our own circumstance. Yes, challenging things happen. They happen every day. They happen to everybody. It is part of being a human being on this planet. It is part of evolving. But we should always put in self-effort. And so that's where the self-effort is important, and not relying on destiny. Do we have a predetermined path, per se, that is already set in motion for us? Yes, we do. But one of the examples I could use is, many of y'all knew a few years ago I was very, very, very ill. And if I had just relied on destiny and sat back and was just like, oh, this is hopeless, this is pointless, like, I'm not going to survive, because at that point it was looking like I wouldn't. And if I didn't put in the self-effort, then my circumstances that I was in would not have changed. But because the self-effort was there, and the determination was there, and the discipline was developed, and there was a lot of, I had to go through a lot of mind stuff that was really challenging. But by putting in all that effort and understanding, and this was the time when I actually got into contact with Guruji, Swami Nikhilananda, because I was seeking answers as to what was going on. And by putting in all this self-effort, I was able to change the circumstance. And so if I didn't, I wouldn't be here today. And through self-effort, God's grace, Guru's grace, I am here today. And whatever I say about that can help others, then that's wonderful. But relying on destiny wouldn't have done me any favors. It wouldn't have done anybody else any favors either, because I do have children, I do have family, I do have responsibilities and duties in day-to-day living, alongside my dedication to my spiritual practices. And so a lot of people are conditioned to rely on destiny, and just basically kind of convincing ourselves that we're stuck in the circumstances that we find ourselves in, or we feel that we've been dealt a bad hand of cards in life, and that's all we're going to experience the whole entire time we're alive. And that's just sitting back and relying on destiny. There has to be a level of self-effort. Do we know what's going to come from the self-effort? No, we don't. We can't predict the future. But it's the self-effort that's important. Sadashivaji says self-effort is God's grace. It absolutely is. And that's a really good thing to point out too, because the self-effort is a blessing. And it's really interesting to think about, because you're blessed with that grace. You're blessed with the ability or the capability of putting in the self-effort, having the knowledge at the right time, or the energy at the right time. And that is God's grace actively working in our lives. And I'm sure that most of us can come up with examples of this. So thank you for bringing that up. So this actually, we're right a few minutes before 9 o'clock when we would normally end. And so this is the end of section 19. So next week will be section 20, which will cover the conduct of enlightened sages, which is also a really, really good topic to understand. And I'll have to find Guruji's, he has an old YouTube video, a really old one, where he explained this topic, and it was really, really helpful for me when I started out on my spiritual journey, because it brought to light basically like red flags to kind of look for in people that you're learning from or that you might follow online, because there are a lot of fake, false gurus and swamis and spiritual teachers out there. And so I'll have to try to find it and then share that with y'all so it can go with next week's Satsanga. Make sure I see, acknowledge everyone. Thank you for attending. Sada Shivaji. It's always good to see you on here. I'm not seeing anyone else. I think it's just you, but that's okay. Yeah, my computer is lagging. Okay, well, divine blessings. Everyone keep prayers, light a candle, hold vigil for all the families, all the people involved in the airplane crash that happened this morning, the flight that was leaving from India to go to London. The last I saw, there was one survivor, which that is very, very difficult for somebody. But there's over 200 people that were on that flight, and all walks of life, all types of people from other countries. Just keep them in your thoughts, keep them in your prayers, and that their souls find rest and peace. And it's such a hard tragedy to think about and wrap our minds around, but this is also where our scriptures and our spiritual practices and studies bring comfort. And when we reflect on these types of tragic events, as challenging as it can be, we can learn a lot from them, and we can grow in our compassion, in our gratitude, in our understanding of each other and for other people, and to just keep showing each other love. And that is definitely something that is needed more today than probably ever. So just keep everyone in your thoughts. There's countless people are impacted and affected. So yeah, I'm kind of at a loss for words. I've been following it today. Yeah, it's very tragic. So, Om Tat Sat, divine blessings to each one of you, and I will get the video downloaded and uploaded to YouTube, and I will see y'all next week. Om Tat Sat.